Alex had always thought of his neighborhood as a quiet, almost perfect suburban enclave. Tree-lined streets curved gently around neat rows of houses, each with its own manicured lawn, flowering shrubs, and freshly painted mailboxes. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved at each other from across the street, children rode bicycles without worry, and the occasional scent of freshly baked bread drifted from open windows. On first impressions, it seemed like an ideal place to settle down, escape the chaos of the city, and enjoy a sense of order and community. From the beginning, Alex had taken pride in maintaining his home to the same high standard as his neighbors. He mowed his lawn on weekends, planted flowers along the walkway, and even repainted his mailbox every spring. He had always believed that a well-kept home was a reflection of one's own discipline and care. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, which governed the neighborhood, had strict rules about lawn care, paint colors, and even mailbox designs. While some found these rules tiresome, Alex had accepted them as part of living in a well-organized community. Then one Monday morning, as Alex walked to check his mail, he noticed something unusual. His mailbox, a simple white wooden post with a small flag, was leaning slightly to one side. A small crack ran along the front as though someone had accidentally bumped into it. He frowned. It was early and the neighbors were just starting their day, so it was unlikely that a car had hit it. He straightened the mailbox and gave it a careful shake. It seemed sturdy enough, but the crack lingered in his mind. For the rest of the day, Alex tried to push the thought aside, attributing it to the occasional misfortune that every homeowner encounters. He imagined that perhaps a delivery truck had grazed it, or maybe the wind had been stronger than usual the night before. He told himself that accidents happen, even in the most orderly neighborhoods. Yet in the back of his mind, he felt a small twinge of unease. Over the next few days, the crack in the mailbox appeared slightly wider, as if it had been nudged again. Alex began to notice subtle things: tire marks on the grass near the mailbox, tiny scratches on the wooden post, and a faint feeling that someone was watching his property. At first, he chalked it up to paranoia. After all, he reminded himself, no one had any reason to bother with his mailbox. It was just a mailbox, after all. But whispers started circulating among the neighbors. During brief conversations over fences or in passing waves, he began to hear stories about minor conflicts within the HOA. One neighbor mentioned that a friend's garden gnome had mysteriously gone missing. Another casually remarked on a small dispute about paint colors last month. These stories seemed disconnected, almost trivial, but Alex could not help but notice a pattern. There were small, unexplained tensions bubbling beneath the surface of the neighborhood's calm exterior. By the end of the week, Alex's unease had grown into a quiet determination. He repaired the crack in the mailbox as best he could, sanding and repainting the post to restore its crisp white finish. He checked the surroundings carefully, noting any unusual footprints or tire tracks, and he even set up a small camera aimed at the mailbox. Alex was not the type to overreact, but something about the repeated damage did not sit right. Despite the worry, life in the neighborhood carried on with its usual rhythm. Children played in the yards, mail carriers went about their routes, and neighbors continued their morning greetings. Alex continued to wave back politely, though his mind was increasingly preoccupied with the mystery of the mailbox. The neighborhood still seemed peaceful, but he could sense a subtle tension in the air, a quiet undercurrent that suggested all was not entirely as it appeared. As the sun set on the first week of unease, Alex stood on his front porch, staring at the mailbox. The crack was barely noticeable now, hidden beneath a fresh coat of paint, but it represented something larger to him, a challenge he had yet to understand. He resolved silently that he would watch carefully, gather information, and prepare for whatever was causing the damage. The quiet neighborhood might look perfect, but Alex was beginning to realize that appearances could be deceiving, and he would need both patience and cleverness to navigate the unexpected challenges ahead. The following week, Alex became increasingly attentive to his mailbox. He replaced the old wooden post with a sturdier model, reinforced with metal brackets and a thicker post. It seemed like a simple solution, one that should have ended the problem. Yet within a few days, the mailbox showed subtle signs of damage once again. The flag was bent, the post wobbled slightly, and the once smooth surface bore faint scratches. At first, Alex tried to convince himself it was merely coincidence. Perhaps a gust of wind, a stray bicycle, or an overzealous delivery driver had caused the minor damage. But as the incidents continued, it became clear that these were no accidents. The timing and pattern suggested someone was deliberately targeting the mailbox. Alex decided to pay closer attention. Every morning he would check the street, noting who came and went. He began recognizing certain faces, a few residents who often lingered near the entrance of the neighborhood, sometimes starring for longer than necessary. More troubling were the occasional vehicles that slowed near his house, circled, and then drove away, leaving Alex with a growing sense of unease. He started keeping a small notebook, jotting down the time, vehicle description, and any unusual behavior he observed. By midweek, a subtle but unmistakable pattern began to emerge. The incidents always occurred when certain individuals were around. They were careful, deliberate, and efficient, leaving just enough evidence to make Alex notice the damage but not enough to prove intent. Despite the frustration, Alex did not confront anyone immediately. He knew that direct confrontation could escalate the situation, and he wanted to gather as much information as possible first. Instead, he began observing more strategically, hiding behind curtains or peeking from the garage when necessary. He also talked discreetly with a few neighbors, carefully asking if anyone had noticed anything unusual. Some neighbors offered vague reassurances, dismissing the incidents as minor accidents. Others hinted at the undercurrents in the neighborhood. "Some people here take the rules very seriously," one neighbor whispered, glancing around as if the walls had ears. "They don't like it when someone steps outside the lines." The cryptic advice left Alex feeling both wary and determined. By the end of the week, Alex had begun to understand the challenge he faced. This was not a simple string of accidents. Someone or some group was actively monitoring his property, testing boundaries, and using subtle intimidation to assert control. The thought was both unsettling and motivating. He realized that patience alone would not be enough. He needed a strategy to protect his mailbox and reclaim his sense of security. In response, Alex began documenting each incident meticulously. He took photos of the scratches, recorded the dates and times, and even made small sketches of tire marks on the lawn. He began to imagine what a solution might look like, something clever, subtle, and completely resilient to interference. While the situation was frustrating, it sparked a sense of determination he had not expected to feel. Life in the neighborhood continued its usual rhythm, but Alex's awareness had sharpened. He noticed small details he had previously overlooked: the way certain neighbors always positioned their cars, how some residents exchanged quiet signals, and even the timing of deliveries that coincided with damage to his property. The neighborhood's calm facade now seemed like a carefully maintained mask, concealing a subtle power dynamic that Alex had only just begun to understand. One evening, as he walked up the driveway, Alex noticed a small piece of cardboard lying near the mailbox. It bore faint tire tracks and a smudge that could have been paint. He crouched to examine it, realizing it might be a clue to the person responsible. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. If he could gather enough evidence, he might understand the pattern completely and devise a way to prevent future damage. Alex's curiosity mixed with determination became a quiet obsession. Every detail mattered, every observation could lead to a solution. He began to think creatively about protective designs for the mailbox, ways to hide it or make it unreachable, and methods to outsmart anyone attempting to interfere. What had started as a minor annoyance was evolving into a personal challenge, one that demanded intelligence, patience, and ingenuity. By the end of the second week, Alex stood on his porch, examining his mailbox with renewed focus. The scratches were faint but noticeable, the flag slightly bent, yet the sturdier post had held firm. He could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken game unfolding between him and whoever was responsible. The quiet neighborhood now seemed alive with hidden activity, and Alex knew that understanding the pattern was only the first step in a larger plan. The mystery had shifted from minor inconvenience to a puzzle demanding cleverness and vigilance. Alex was determined to solve it, no matter how subtle or persistent the challenge. The mailbox was no longer just a place for letters. It had become a symbol of resilience, patience, and the need to outthink those who sought to disrupt his peace. By the start of the third week, Alex had become almost obsessive about protecting his mailbox. Each morning, he would rise before sunrise, cup of coffee in hand, and scan the street from the front window. He scrutinized each vehicle, each passerby, every movement. It was not paranoia, it was careful observation, a necessary strategy after weeks of unexplained damage. Yet the repeated incidents had begun to weigh on him. Even though he loved his home and neighborhood, the thought that someone might be deliberately targeting his property gnawed at his peace of mind. Alex decided it was time to approach the HOA directly. He attended the next scheduled meeting, carrying a folder filled with photos, sketches, and notes documenting every incident. The meeting room was neat, brightly lit, and filled with familiar faces. Residents chatted politely about landscaping tips, neighborhood events, and minor maintenance concerns. The HOA officers sat at the front table, speaking with calm authority, their expressions neutral but firm. When it was his turn, Alex stood and explained the situation. He described the repeated mailbox damage, presented the documentation, and asked for clarification or support. "I just want to understand what is happening and how to prevent it from continuing," he said, keeping his voice measured. "I'm trying to follow all the rules, but my mailbox keeps getting damaged." The HOA officers listened, nodding politely, but their responses were careful and indirect. One officer suggested it might be ordinary wear and tear, while another mentioned unexpected accidents that happen in neighborhoods. They avoided eye contact, shifting the responsibility back to Alex without outright denying his claims. It became clear that, although they were courteous, they were unwilling or unable to address the problem directly. Alex left the meeting frustrated but determined. He realized that the conventional route, filing complaints and relying on HOA intervention, would not solve the issue. The problem required a more proactive approach. He returned home and examined the mailbox, noting every scratch and dent. The post was holding, but the damage was increasing, subtle but persistent. It was clear someone was testing boundaries, seeing how far they could go without facing consequences. In response, Alex began documenting even more meticulously. He set up small cameras to capture activity during the day and night. He kept a detailed log of tire tracks, vehicle descriptions, and any unusual behavior near his property. Each night, he reviewed the footage, looking for patterns, clues, or anything that could help him understand the repeated damage. Slowly, a picture emerged. The incidents were deliberate, consistent, and coordinated. Neighbors began noticing Alex's careful vigilance. Some offered quiet words of encouragement. "You're the only one paying attention," a friendly neighbor said one morning. "I'd be frustrated too, but it seems like you're handling it smartly." Others were more cautious, wary of involving themselves, hinting that there were subtle tensions in the neighborhood they preferred not to discuss. Still, Alex continued to observe and record, undeterred by the quiet murmurs around him. The repeated damage had also shifted Alex's thinking. It was no longer just a matter of repairing the mailbox. He needed a solution that would prevent further interference entirely. He began exploring creative options: protective barriers, reinforced posts, hidden placements, or even disguised designs. Each idea was weighed carefully against practicality, appearance, and HOA regulations. He realized that a clever solution would require ingenuity rather than force. By the end of the week, Alex's approach had become methodical and strategic. He had not confronted anyone directly, but he was no longer passive. Observation and documentation were tools, patience was an ally, and creativity was becoming the key to his eventual success. The mailbox, once a simple functional object, had transformed into a focal point of a quiet but growing challenge. Alex understood that this was not a battle of strength, but one of wit and strategy. Whoever had been damaging his mailbox underestimated his patience and intelligence. The subtle game unfolding before him required clever thinking and careful planning, and Alex was ready to rise to the challenge. He could almost feel the neighborhood itself holding its breath, waiting to see how the quiet homeowner would respond to repeated interference. As he stood on his porch one evening, watching the sun dip behind the rows of trees, Alex allowed himself a small, determined smile. The problem was no longer a mere inconvenience. It had become an opportunity to test his creativity, patience, and problem-solving. Whatever the outcome, he knew he would not be passive. The mailbox would not be an easy target, and Alex was already imagining ways to make it untouchable. The quiet neighborhood seemed as calm as ever, but for Alex, the stakes had grown. He was no longer just a homeowner. He was an observer, a strategist, and a planner. The repeated incidents had revealed patterns, sparked ingenuity, and set the stage for a solution that would be both clever and resilient. The game had begun, and Alex was ready to play. By the start of the fourth week, Alex's patience was wearing thin. Despite his meticulous documentation and careful observation, the mailbox had been damaged yet again. The new post he had installed was slightly bent, the flag chipped, and the carefully painted surface marked with fresh scratches. The repeated incidents had begun to feel personal, as if someone was deliberately testing him, taunting him with their persistence. Alex tried to remind himself to remain calm. He had already gathered evidence, attended HOA meetings, and observed patterns. Yet the sense of frustration was difficult to shake. Each time he repaired the mailbox, a small knot of anxiety formed in his chest, wondering if it would happen again. He realized that simply replacing the mailbox was no longer a solution. Something stronger, smarter, and more creative was required. He spent the following days researching possible ways to protect his property without violating HOA rules. Ideas ranged from reinforced steel posts to hidden enclosures, but each had drawbacks. Some were too conspicuous, drawing unwanted attention. Others were expensive or impractical. As he explored each option, he began to notice a pattern in his thinking. The solution would not be brute force. It would require ingenuity, subtlety, and clever design. During this time, Alex also reflected on the nature of the challenge. Whoever had been targeting his mailbox was patient, careful, and observant. They seemed to enjoy testing limits, exploiting small vulnerabilities, and creating frustration. Alex realized that confronting them directly might escalate matters or cause unintended consequences. Instead, he needed a strategy that would neutralize the problem entirely without provoking conflict. Late one evening, while sipping coffee and reviewing his notes, inspiration struck. He sketched several designs for a mailbox that would be almost impossible to reach or damage. Some were hidden within landscaping features. Others involved retractable or cleverly disguised structures. He imagined a mailbox disguised as a garden ornament, a sculptural feature, or even integrated into a fence. The goal was simple: create a mailbox that could not be touched without being noticed, yet remained fully functional and compliant with neighborhood regulations. Alex shared some of these ideas with a trusted neighbor, someone who had quietly offered encouragement during his observations. Together, they discussed materials, placement, and the visual design. They considered durability, camouflage, and clever angles that would prevent tampering. Alex felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was no longer a passive response. It was a project, a challenge that demanded creativity and strategic thinking. As the week progressed, Alex began preparing for the installation of the new mailbox. He gathered materials, measured dimensions, and even practiced small elements of the design in his garage. Each detail mattered, from the height of the post to the angle of the opening. He wanted to ensure that the mailbox would be both resilient and visually appealing, so it would blend seamlessly into the neighborhood while remaining untouchable. Meanwhile, the tension in the neighborhood continued subtly. Alex noticed familiar vehicles circling, neighbors observing quietly, and small signs that the previous pattern of interference was still in effect. Yet, instead of causing fear, these signs motivated him. He realized that the mailbox was no longer just an object. It had become a symbol of ingenuity, resilience, and clever problem-solving. Whoever had been attempting to test him would now face a challenge they could not predict. By the end of the week, Alex stood on his porch, examining the old mailbox one last time before removing it. The scratches, dents, and bent flag were a testament to weeks of persistence, both from the unknown antagonist and from himself. He took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and determination. The breaking point had arrived. The mailbox was no longer a minor inconvenience. It was a puzzle, a challenge, and an opportunity. Alex realized that the next step would be decisive. He would not simply repair or replace the mailbox. He would transform it into something untouchable, something that would stand as a clever solution to persistent interference. The neighborhood might appear calm, but the game was about to change. His patience, creativity, and strategic thinking would all be put to the test. For the first time in weeks, Alex felt a sense of excitement. The repeated mailbox damage had forced him to think differently, to approach the problem not as a victim but as a strategist. The breaking point was not a moment of defeat. It was the catalyst for a solution that required ingenuity, precision, and foresight. He was ready. The next phase would be the most important yet. With the old mailbox removed and memories of repeated damage fresh in his mind, Alex turned his full attention to planning something truly clever. He knew that a conventional mailbox would never withstand the persistent interference. This required ingenuity, subtlety, and a solution that was both practical and creative. It was a challenge he approached with the careful focus of a strategist preparing for a critical move. Alex began by sketching multiple concepts on paper. Some designs were simple reinforcements of the existing mailbox, stronger posts, thicker materials, and protective enclosures. Others were more imaginative, a mailbox disguised as part of the landscaping, one integrated into a sculptural feature, and even a retractable version that could disappear when not in use. Each idea had its merits, but Alex's goal was clear. The mailbox had to be untouchable without drawing unwanted attention or violating neighborhood regulations. He enlisted the help of a neighbor, Mrs. Franklin, who was known for her love of gardening and creative problem-solving. Together, they brainstormed ways to blend function and disguise. A mailbox hidden inside a decorative rock seemed promising, as did a post cleverly camouflaged with climbing vines and a small trellis. They measured dimensions, considered the angles of approach, and discussed how mail delivery could remain simple and efficient. Every detail mattered. Alex spent several evenings experimenting in his garage, creating small prototypes. He tested materials, paint finishes, and stability, ensuring that the final design would withstand wind, accidental bumps, and most importantly, deliberate interference. Each test brought him closer to a design that was both clever and durable. He found himself smiling at the ingenuity of it all, enjoying the process in a way he had not anticipated. The mailbox was no longer just a functional object. It had become a project, a puzzle, and a symbol of resilience. The planning phase also involved strategy. Alex knew that the installation itself needed to be subtle to avoid detection. He considered timing, lighting, and angles, ensuring that the new mailbox would be in place without drawing attention from the street or curious neighbors. He imagined the reactions of those who had damaged the previous mailbox, picturing their confusion when they encountered the new, untouchable design. The thought brought a quiet sense of satisfaction. While planning, Alex also thought about potential contingencies. What if someone tried to tamper with the mailbox despite its clever design? He added features to reinforce stability, prevent tipping, and protect the mail slot. He even considered minor decoys to divert attention, ensuring that the mailbox would remain secure under scrutiny. It was a level of preparation that required foresight and careful observation, both of which Alex had developed over the past weeks. By midweek, the design was finalized. It was a combination of disguise, durability, and creative placement. The mailbox would blend seamlessly with the landscaping, its unusual appearance masking its true function. Mail delivery would remain simple, and no part of the structure would violate HOA regulations. The plan was clever, subtle, and most importantly, effective. Alex felt a surge of confidence. He was no longer reacting to repeated incidents. He was taking control and outsmarting the problem entirely. The anticipation built steadily as Alex prepared for installation. He gathered materials, double-checked measurements, and rehearsed the process mentally. Every detail had been considered, from stability to appearance, ensuring the mailbox would not only survive, but also withstand scrutiny. The planning phase had transformed the problem into an opportunity, allowing Alex to channel frustration into creativity. Finally, one quiet evening, the plan was ready to be executed. Alex looked at the old mailbox's vacant spot and envisioned the new design taking its place. The weeks of observation, documentation, and creative thinking had led to this moment. What had once been a source of frustration was now a chance to showcase patience, ingenuity, and strategic thinking. The surprise mailbox would be his solution, one that no one could easily touch or undermine. Alex felt a quiet thrill. The planning phase had prepared him for success. The anticipation of seeing the design in place, knowing it would withstand future attempts, filled him with satisfaction. The challenge that had seemed overwhelming weeks ago had now become an opportunity to demonstrate cleverness, patience, and resourcefulness. The next step, The installation would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his quiet but determined battle. The night Alex had been planning for finally arrived. The neighborhood was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights and the occasional flicker of porch lamps. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees lining the street, carrying with it the faint scent of evening blooms. To the casual observer, everything seemed perfectly ordinary, but for Alex, this was the moment of truth. He gathered his tools and materials, carrying them carefully to the vacant spot where his old mailbox had once stood. Every piece had been measured, painted, and tested in his garage. Even the smallest details had been considered. The exact angle for the mailbox opening, the stability of the base, and the camouflage that would make it blend seamlessly with the surrounding landscaping. Alex felt a mixture of excitement and nervous energy as he laid out the components. With methodical precision, he began the installation. The base went first, a sturdy platform designed to resist tipping or accidental impact. He positioned it slightly off-center, taking advantage of natural shrubs to obscure it from direct view. Next, he attached the post, ensuring it was perfectly vertical and securely anchored in the ground. Every adjustment was made carefully and every measurement double-checked. This mailbox was not just functional, it was a statement of patience and ingenuity. The main body of the mailbox came next. Alex had chosen a design that allowed it to appear as an ordinary garden feature at first glance, a decorative rock formation, complete with subtle cracks and color variations. Yet behind the disguise, it held a standard mailbox slot, fully accessible to the postal carrier, but nearly impossible for anyone else to tamper with without being noticed. He smiled quietly at the cleverness of it, imagining the confusion of anyone who had previously caused damage. As he worked, Alex remained alert to any movement on the street. He had learned over the past weeks that timing was crucial. Even a single observer could ruin the surprise. The street was still, save for the occasional hum of a passing car, and Alex allowed himself a small sense of relief. He carefully attached the final panels, adjusted the camouflage foliage, and ensured the mailbox flag functioned smoothly. Once the installation was complete, Alex stepped back to admire his work. The mailbox blended perfectly with the landscaping, appearing to be nothing more than an ornamental feature. Yet he knew its true purpose. It was cleverly designed, robust, and entirely resistant to the interference that had plagued him for weeks. The mailbox stood as a silent sentinel, a testament to patience, observation, and careful planning. To ensure everything functioned properly, Alex ran several tests. He inserted letters, raised and lowered the flag, and even examined the surrounding ground for signs of potential tampering. Everything worked seamlessly. The design had exceeded his expectations. For the first time since the initial damage, he felt a sense of confidence and control. The repeated frustration, the careful observations, and the planning had culminated in a solution that was both clever and practical. As the night deepened, Alex cleaned up his tools and surveyed the street one final time. Everything appeared calm and ordinary, but he knew the mailbox now carried a quiet power. It was untouchable, clever, and perfectly suited to withstand the subtle tests that had been directed at him. The repeated incidents had forced him to think creatively, and in doing so, he had crafted a solution that was both functional and ingenious. The installation was not just about protecting a mailbox. It was about reclaiming control over a situation that had begun to feel personal. Alex felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond mere practicality. He had approached the problem strategically, with patience and intelligence, and the result was a quiet triumph. The mailbox now stood as a symbol of clever problem-solving and resilience. As he walked back into the house, Alex reflected on the weeks that had led to this moment. Each incident, each observation, each late night spent sketching and testing designs had contributed to a solution that was thoughtful, effective, and surprising. The quiet neighborhood, which had seemed so ordinary, now held a small secret, a clever mailbox that no one could easily touch, a testament to strategy and careful planning. For Alex, the installation marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The challenge had evolved from a minor inconvenience into an opportunity for creativity and problem-solving. The mailbox was no longer just a place for letters. It was a symbol of resilience, patience, and ingenuity. The neighborhood appeared calm, but Alex knew that the subtle game of observation and cleverness had reached a new stage. He had won a quiet victory, one that would stand undisturbed, silently showcasing his cleverness for weeks to come. The following morning, Alex awoke with a quiet sense of anticipation. After weeks of repeated interference, careful observation, and meticulous planning, the moment had arrived to see how the neighborhood would respond. The sun rose slowly over the tree-lined streets, casting long shadows across lawns and sidewalks. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, and unchanged. Yet Alex knew better. The mailbox he had installed the night before was no longer just a fixture. It was a clever challenge waiting to be discovered. Within hours, subtle signs of interest began to appear. Familiar vehicles slowed as they approached his house, tires crunching faintly over the gravel. Neighbors paused in their walks to glance curiously at his yard. Alex observed from his window, coffee in hand, feeling a quiet thrill. The mailbox remained perfectly still, blending seamlessly with the landscaping, and yet it was impossible to ignore the faint curiosity it inspired. Later in the morning, 2 HOA officers arrived. They were the same individuals whose subtle interference had plagued Alex's mailbox for weeks. Their approach was cautious, their expressions polite but tinged with curiosity. They parked their vehicle on the street, stepped out, and began to inspect the yard carefully. Alex watched quietly from the window, documenting their movements and reactions. The subtle tension was almost tangible, the neighborhood's calm appearance hiding a quiet confrontation about to unfold. The officers circled the mailbox, leaning slightly as if to test its sturdiness. They tapped gently on the disguised surface, pushed lightly, and even examined the surrounding landscaping for hidden mechanisms. Yet every test proved futile. The mailbox remained perfectly secure, untouchable, and fully functional. It was clever, discreet, and resistant to interference, all the qualities Alex had envisioned during weeks of careful planning. Alex could see the subtle frustration in their expressions. They exchanged glances, whispered to each other, and retraced their steps, clearly trying to figure out what had changed. Their movements were deliberate but inconclusive. The mailbox, disguised as a decorative garden feature, refused to reveal its true nature. Alex felt a quiet sense of triumph, knowing that his strategic planning had outsmarted their previous tactics without a single confrontation. The officers eventually moved on, still observing, still curious, but unable to affect the mailbox. They walked away, heads tilted in thought, likely puzzled by the clever design and precise placement. Alex allowed himself a small smile, recognizing that the patience, observation, and creativity he had invested had finally paid off. The mailbox was no longer vulnerable. It had become a symbol of ingenuity and quiet resilience. As the day went on, neighbors began to notice the new mailbox as well. Some paused and commented on its unusual appearance, marveling at the clever design. Others whispered about the previous incidents, connecting the dots and realizing that something different had been done. Alex remained discreet, observing reactions without drawing attention to himself. The mailbox had become a quiet focal point, an ingenious solution that spoke for itself. By evening, the subtle power dynamics in the neighborhood had shifted. The officers no longer had control over the situation, and Alex had established a clever equilibrium. The mailbox stood untouchable, blending seamlessly into its surroundings while fulfilling its function perfectly. What had once been a source of frustration had become a triumph of strategy, patience, and ingenuity. Alex felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had achieved a clever victory without confrontation or escalation. Reflecting on the experience, Alex realized that the challenge had taught him valuable lessons. Observation, patience, and careful planning were far more powerful than simple reaction. By taking the time to understand patterns and anticipate interference, he had transformed a persistent problem into an opportunity for creative problem-solving. The mailbox was now more than a practical object. It was a symbol of cleverness and careful thought. As night fell, the neighborhood returned to its calm rhythm. Streetlights flickered on, casting warm light over the lawns and sidewalks. The mailbox, now a quiet sentinel, remained untouched, secure, and cleverly disguised. Alex sipped his evening tea on the porch, feeling a sense of contentment. The repeated challenges, the careful planning, and the clever solution had culminated in a subtle but meaningful victory. The HOA officers had tested boundaries, the neighborhood had observed quietly, and Alex had responded with patience, ingenuity, and creativity. The game was over, but the lessons endured. The mailbox stood as a testament to resilience, cleverness, and the power of strategic thinking in the face of persistent challenges. The days that followed the installation of Alex's cleverly disguised mailbox brought a sense of calm he had not felt in weeks. The street, lined with trees and sunlit lawns, appeared as peaceful and ordinary as ever. Yet for Alex, there was a quiet sense of triumph that went beyond appearances. His meticulous planning, careful observation, and ingenuity had transformed a source of repeated frustration into a symbol of resilience and clever problem-solving. Every morning, Alex would step onto his porch, sip a cup of coffee, and glance at the mailbox. It blended seamlessly with the surrounding landscaping, disguised as a decorative rock and trellis combination. To the casual passerby, it appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary garden feature. But Alex knew the truth. It was a solution born of patience, strategy, and creativity, a mailbox no one could touch without being noticed. Over time, the subtle shifts in the neighborhood became more apparent. Neighbors who had once whispered speculatively about disputes now admired the ingenuity of the mailbox design. Some stopped to compliment Alex quietly, asking questions about how he had accomplished such a clever disguise. Others simply observed, intrigued, and perhaps inspired by the level of thought and care that had gone into solving a problem so quietly. Alex noticed these changes with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that respect had replaced the subtle tension that had once permeated the street. The HOA officers, too, had adjusted their approach. They continued their rounds and maintained the rules, but the previous sense of authority over Alex's property had diminished. They no longer had the easy target they had exploited before, and Alex's clever solution remained untouched. The subtle power dynamic had shifted, not through confrontation or conflict, but through careful planning and intelligent design. It was a victory achieved through patience and ingenuity rather than aggression or escalation. Alex reflected on the journey that had led to this point. What began as a minor annoyance, a mailbox damaged repeatedly, had grown into a challenge that tested his patience, observation skills, and creativity. Each incident, each subtle hint of interference, had forced him to think differently, to plan carefully, and to develop a solution that was both clever and practical. The process had taught him the value of strategic thinking and the power of perseverance. Beyond the practical solution, Alex found a deeper sense of satisfaction. The mailbox was no longer simply a container for letters. It was a symbol of resilience. It reminded him that challenges, no matter how persistent or subtle, could be overcome with thoughtfulness, ingenuity, and patience. The repeated interference had transformed from a source of frustration into an opportunity for personal growth and creative problem-solving. Neighbors began to discuss the mailbox in quiet admiration. Some wondered how Alex had conceived such an innovative solution, while others were simply impressed by its functionality and subtlety. The story of the clever mailbox spread, not as gossip, but as a small lesson in resourcefulness and strategic thinking. Alex remained humble, observing the reactions with quiet amusement and satisfaction, knowing that the solution had worked perfectly without causing conflict or upsetting anyone. Evenings became a time for quiet reflection. Alex would sit on the porch, the soft glow of the streetlights illuminating the yard, and think about the weeks that had led to this moment. He remembered the initial frustration, the repeated damage, the careful observations, and the long nights of planning and testing. Each step had been a lesson, a reminder that patience, careful observation, and creativity could solve even persistent problems. The mailbox, standing firm and cleverly disguised, was a silent reminder of that lesson. It symbolized a triumph achieved not through confrontation, but through strategy and ingenuity. Alex realized that the experience had strengthened not only his problem-solving skills, but also his confidence in facing challenges creatively. He felt a sense of pride, knowing that his solution would endure, quietly effective and resilient for as long as it remained in place. As the neighborhood returned to its regular rhythm, Alex found a renewed sense of peace. The mailbox remained untouched, functional, and cleverly disguised. What had once been a source of tension had become a testament to patience, observation, and clever thinking. Alex smiled quietly, knowing that the challenge had been met and overcome. The mailbox was more than a practical object. It was a symbol of victory, ingenuity, and resilience, a small triumph in a quiet, orderly world. The story of Alex and his mailbox had reached its conclusion. not with conflict or confrontation, but with cleverness, persistence, and strategic thinking. The quiet neighborhood remained peaceful, the street lined with trees and neat lawns, and the mailbox stood as a subtle but enduring reminder. Challenges could be overcome with patience, observation, and creativity. Alex had solved the problem in the best possible way, leaving a legacy of quiet triumph and clever ingenuity. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.